Ukrainian officials say its forces have made gains on the battlefield just hours after President Volodymyr Zelenskyy confirmed an expected counteroffensive is underway. There are reports of intense fighting near the devastated city of Bakhmut, as well as in Crimea in southwestern Donetsk. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Ukraine has failed to advance anywhere on the front lines. Meanwhile, his defense minister has signed an order which gives military volunteers the same legal status as regular army units fighting in Ukraine. Ukraine's military is expected to use new tactics as fighting increases. Charles Trafford's in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine.
We spent this morning with Ukrainian forces in the town of Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar is important because it is the first town west of Bakhmut. Of course, Bakhmut was claimed by the Russians to be fully under their control last month. That's something that's disputed by Ukrainian forces. But what we saw in that area seemed to be an effort by Ukrainian artillery units to try, as the military call it, softening up targets in and around Bakhmut. That's basically testing Russian defences, testing how strong they are before a more consolidated push. According to the Ukrainians in that area, they said that they are making gains, slow gains, from the south of Bakhmut, heading around to the east of the town. They said that those gains could be up to a kilometre a week, but they admitted that some days it could be as little as, say, 20 metres and others 500. They also said that there was a similar operation happening to the north of Bakhmut as well, again just probing attacks. It's very difficult to say whether this in fact is part of some sort of diversionary tactic by the Ukrainians to attract attention away from another area where we're also hearing that there is ongoing shelling and heavy fighting. That's south of Zaporizhia. But for all intents and purposes, the kind of operations that are happening, that's another siren that you hear there in the background here in Kramatorsk. These sirens are now going off, I suppose, every hour or so. But as I say, it's impossible really to know for sure whether what we saw in Chasiv Yar, close to Bakhmut, was anything more than a diversion from potentially a bigger move being planned by the Ukrainians in other areas along the front line. Charles Trafford, Al Jazeera, Kramatorsk.
Michael Mulroy is a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and he explains the planning that's probably gone into Ukraine's counteroffensive.
I think this is what we should have actually expected. They did shaping operations behind enemy lines, collecting intelligence so that they could then do what's called a reconnaissance by force, where they probe the lines, they try to push in to find out where the Russians are weak and where they are strong, and then they adjust their campaign plans based on those probes. And I think that's what we're seeing now. So when the Russians say they're repelling, I don't think that's accurate. I think that is the intent of the Ukrainian operations. They will send in an armored force to see where the resistance is strongest and where it is weakest, and then they will calculate their campaign plan based on those probes. I think the Ukrainians essentially have had to build the plane while they're flying, in the sense that they are in the middle of an existential fight for their country, yet they're having to train their forces on new weapon systems, new aircraft, and new vehicles. And so they had to be able to do that so that they could effectively use those weapon systems in this counteroffensive. And I think that's probably why you saw a delay, but I also don't think they want to rush into anything. They want to do what's most advantageous to them so that they can take back as much territory as they can and hopefully put Russia in a position where they feel like they have to come to some kind of negotiation. Or hopefully they decide that they need to leave the country, but I don't think anybody expects that to happen.
Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry has criticized a UN Court of Justice decision to let 32 countries take part in a genocide trial against Moscow. The ministry says each of them supports Ukraine. Kyiv accuses Moscow of genocide in the current conflict, and it says Moscow misused the International Genocide Convention to falsely justify its invasion of Ukraine last year. Russia says the court is abusing its power and is threatening a peaceful resolution of the conflict.